On Monday the 23rd of October, a 25-year-old woman named Chyna Crawford said goodbye to her sister after making plans to see each other again later that week. But little did anybody know that this would be the last official sighting of the young woman. At the time, she had also made plans to see one of her friends the next day at a shopping mall in Washington, D.C. So after she failed to show up, Chyna's mother, Elisa, would soon receive a concerning phone call. Further attempts were then made to contact Chyna, but unfortunately, they were also to no avail, ultimately leading to her family filing an official missing persons report with the police. For weeks, the family were working alongside authorities with the hope of finding their missing loved one, but after receiving no luck, the case was eventually upgraded to the Major Crimes Unit, with the police firmly believing that foul play was likely involved. However, after almost 2 months of searching, the police are still no closer to finding out what really happened to Chyna Crawford, which has led many to wonder, could she be yet another victim of human trafficking in Washington, D.C.? Chyna Danielle Crawford was born in 1998 in the capital city of America, Washington, D.C., where she was the youngest of her close-knit family, which consisted of 4 older siblings, including Kaya Strong and Derek Crawford. Little was known about her childhood, but in her older years, her family described her as an incredibly hard-working individual with a passion for helping the less fortunate. And this particular character trait was more than evident through her decision to work for a non-profit organisation as a community engagement liaison, joining towards the end of 2022. In addition to this, according to her mother Elisa, Chyna was also known to have a heart of gold, albeit with a feisty personality. But it was well known amongst her family and friends that if you ever needed her, she was always there. But before I get carried away, it must be said that just like most people, Chyna didn't always have it the easiest, especially given that she was the youngest of the family. But perhaps this was why her mother was so proud when she was finally able to afford her own apartment in southwest Washington. So, as you can imagine, the following year was shaping up to be filled with excitement for Chyna, with her new job, new apartment and new life, and at first, it really was. Despite living away from her family for the first time, she still managed to keep in contact with her mother every day, and her sister Kaya was even planning on moving back to Washington. So as the year 2023 was coming to a close, Chyna appeared to be looking forward to the next challenge. However, towards the end of October, every ounce of optimism held by the Crawford family would soon be stripped of its essence when the young woman would suddenly disappear without a trace. On Monday the 23rd of October, the 25-year-old woman was speaking with her sister Kaya on Good Hope Road in southeast Washington at around 10 p.m. They had bumped into each other as Kaya was exploring the area as she had just recently moved back to be near her family. The two then shared a short conversation, but as it was getting late, they agreed to see each other again at the weekend for a family gathering at their mother's place, before eventually going their separate ways. Kaya then walked back to her new home, but it is unknown where Chyna was headed, especially given that the very next day her friend would fail to make contact with her, despite previously agreeing to meet up for shopping. This friend then contacted Elisa Crawford to let her know that she was unable to get a hold of Chyna and was concerned, given that it was unlike her to flake on plans. It was hypothesized that she could have spontaneously chosen to stay somewhere else for the night and had possibly forgotten about her plans, but this still didn't explain why she was unable to respond to her messages. Well, in retaliation to this news, Elisa then called her other daughter Kia to ask if she had heard from Chyna, but she was only able to verify speaking to her sister the day before, alluding to the fact that this may have been the last time anybody had spoken to the young woman. For the following days, Elisa continued calling and sending messages to her 25-year-old daughter's cell phone, but unfortunately, there was still no response. She even tried to locate her with the Find My iPhone app, but she soon discovered that the phone had been turned off and was therefore unable to be located. So with this in mind, Elisa then called the police and asked them to conduct a quick welfare check of Chyna's one-bedroom apartment in southwest Washington, hoping they would discover her alive and well. But what they would soon find only added further mystery to the situation. On Thursday the 26th of October, Chyna Crawford officially reported her youngest daughter as missing to the Washington, D.C. police after they confirmed that during their welfare check, Chyna was not at home and that her apartment was left in its normal state, implying she likely hadn't planned on skipping town. Police officers were then sent out to Chyna's last known location, and posters were placed all around the local area, with news stations also lending a hand by raising awareness for the case. According to Kia Strong, in the early stages of the investigation, the family coordinated 2 large searches, with the first taking place on Monday the 30th of October, where they decided to go down to Anacostia Park to check behind a local railroad track. The second search was then conducted 5 days later on November 4th, which consisted of many more people from other states, some of which didn't even know Chyna. So given the amount of support that the family were receiving, hopes were relatively high at this time that they would find something. However, despite the huge efforts made by everybody involved, the police were still unable to learn anything new about the case after almost 2 weeks of searching, which understandably worried the Crawford family and led the police to increase their efforts, as with each passing day an extra layer of danger was being added to the situation. But then, within a moment, everything seemed to change, when the police would uncover a piece of evidence that would soon lead them to upgrade this relatively innocent missing person case to a potential major crime. On Friday the 3rd of November, detectives from the Metropolitan Police Department posted a press release stating that authorities were seeking the public's assistance in locating Chyna Crawford due to a harrowing update in the case. It soon became clear that during a routine inspection of the security cameras in southeast DC, an officer was able to single out a vehicle which matched the description of Chyna's missing car. They then released an image of the vehicle stating that her grey 2012 Mercedes-Benz CLS 550 was spotted driving through the area, but they were unable to provide a timestamp to prove when this took place. The car even had the same Virginia license plate, which likely proved that somebody was driving around in her vehicle during her disappearance. However, with this new update, the police were now more confident that they would be able to find Chyna, given that images of her car and face were plastered all over the neighbourhood, and so it was looking like it would only be a matter of time before she was found, or so they thought, as it wasn't long before another week quickly flew by, and despite the optimism of the authorities, unfortunately they were still no closer to finding out what actually happened to Chyna. So it was at this point that a police spokesperson confirmed that Chyna was now missing under suspicious circumstances, and so they decided that they had no other choice than to pass the case over to the Major Crimes Unit, which allowed them to assign more resources and detectives to assist in the investigation. But once again, it would seem that the efforts of the detectives would fall short, as another month of time would soon pass by, and even with Chyna's case now being classed as a major crime, the authorities still had absolutely no idea where she could be, with no suspects in sight. Now, unfortunately, this is all we know about the case for now, but Chyna's family are refusing to give up the search and are still very much dedicated to raising awareness, in the hopes that somebody from the public will recognise her face and confirm her safety. But given that the young woman has now been missing for almost 2 months, her safe return is starting to look more and more unlikely. So with that, let's get into some of the potential theories. Now, to start off the theory portion of this video, as usual I would prefer to begin with a more optimistic outlook of the situation. But to be honest, it's very difficult to contemplate any scenario here that leaves Chyna unharmed. So nevertheless, one theory which I always find myself coming back to in these videos is the possibility of human trafficking, especially due to the fact that Chyna is a young woman who lives in an area known for nefarious behaviour. In my opinion, it's very possible that she could have arrived home, or just parked up somewhere and then while getting out of her car, She was approached by a group of men who then forced her into their vehicle before driving off. But if this was in fact the case, why would they choose Chyna specifically? Perhaps just for convenience, but what if she was talking to somebody beforehand? Unfortunately, she disappeared along with her cell phone, so the police have been unable to analyse any messages to try and trace a possible suspect. But I think it could have been possible that she was talking to somebody and maybe agreed to meet them somewhere. It does seem to be a common thread in these cases that somebody will mysteriously go missing after they agree to meet up with a stranger. In fact, there are many examples of these types of cases on this channel, including DeAndrea Ford, who was another young woman of colour who suddenly disappeared back in September and hasn't been seen to this day. But if this is the case, what does it mean for Chyna? Well, in my opinion, there are two possible conclusions here. Either she's being held captive against her will while the suspects are strategizing what to do with her, or she has already been bought and sold into the underworld of human trafficking, just waiting to be rescued. However, a third possibility could also be that the 25-year-old woman is unfortunately no longer with us, which, although is incredibly difficult to fathom given the evidence, it is a possibility that we have to consider. As Chyna has now been missing for almost 2 months, the reality of her situation is only growing in concern, and this is evident with the action of the police upgrading her case to a major crime and even getting homicide detectives involved. But if her life was taken, what would have been the motive? Well, one detail I chose to leave out of the investigation due to a lack of concrete information was that according to Chyna's mother, Chyna Crawford, at the time of her disappearance, Chyna had a boyfriend who was serving time in a DC jail for an unrelated offence. Now, although I can completely see why Chyna would be quick to rule this out as a potential lead, due to the man being in prison, but that doesn't mean he couldn't have asked one of his friends to act on his behalf. I will just say now, I do not know enough about the background of this relationship, so I could be getting the situation all wrong. But if this man had been in prison for a while, you could imagine he may have started to get paranoid that Chyna would leave him, or even worse, cheat on him while he was locked up. So sticking with this theory, if this was the case, imagine the frustration he would feel if one of his friends informed him that they saw his girlfriend with someone else. For a man who is serving time in prison, I don't think it would be too much of a stretch to say he could have been capable of ordering a hit on his potentially cheating girlfriend, especially after being locked up for months. Now, this is of course an incredibly far-fetched theory, which is not based on any real evidence, but I certainly believe it's something for the detectives to think about, and I certainly would not rule the boyfriend out of the equation just yet as a potential suspect. But to offer an alternative option, if it wasn't the boyfriend, who else could be responsible for taking Chyna's life? Well, it could be anybody. An impulsive local who seized an opportunity, an unknown enemy of Chyna's that was seeking revenge, or maybe even a potential serial killer who could be operating in the South Washington DC area. To be honest, these theories are all very possible, and given that we haven't seen the young woman for almost 2 months now, you could argue that they are starting to become the more likely scenarios here. But even if Chyna did have her life cruelly taken by a local resident, why is it that the police have been unable to find a suspect after such a lengthy investigation? Well, it should be noted that Chyna's very own brother, Derek Crawford, came out to say that after Chyna's case was initially picked up by the Missing Persons Unit, he called the detective assigned to the case multiple times a day to find out if there were any updates, or if the detectives had any questions for him or his family. But strangely, he never heard back from this person. It wasn't until 3 days later that he finally reached someone in the unit who told him that the detective was on leave, but as Derek astutely pointed out, why would you assign a case to a detective who is on leave? A DC police spokesman named Paris Lubell responded by saying that the case detective was on their regular day off, but other detectives from the Missing Persons Unit were working on this case on their behalf and conducted a number of investigative steps. But although this does answer the question as to why the detective wasn't able to get back in touch with Derek, this still doesn't explain why the acting detectives didn't call Derek or anybody else within the family to update them daily on the situation. After all, a phone call only takes 5 minutes, especially if there's no new information. So with this in mind, it would seem that the case hasn't been handled as best as it could have, which could potentially allude to some deviancy within the police force. The Crawford family would also come out to say that despite their strong belief that Chyna was kidnapped, the police would only ever claim that her disappearance was suspicious, despite the clear and obvious signs that something more dangerous was taking place. Another point to add is that Washington DC is the nation's capital city, and so it's no surprise that it has more surveillance cameras than anywhere else in the country. But despite this fact, somehow the police have been unable to find any crucial evidence to place Chyna anywhere on the day of her disappearance after she left her sister. Now this could mean she was snatched immediately after walking away, but it could also mean that somebody within the police is intentionally trying to cover up the crime. But if this was the case, what would be their motive? Well, it would be difficult to say, as outside of a possible hate crime or accidental killing, like in the case of Dexter Wade, any other answer is quite far-fetched in my opinion. But saying this, I suppose it is plausible that one of the acting officers was involved in her disappearance, and intentionally slowed the case down to diminish the heat. Or maybe a relative or friend of a police officer was involved in the crime, and was being protected. Nevertheless, before I get too carried away here, I should just clarify that I have no real evidence for this police cover-up theory. However, given the mismanagement of this case, it would certainly explain why the police were so unhelpful and slow to act in the initial stages of the investigation. But either way, until we have more evidence, we can only continue to speculate on what really happened to Chyna Crawford, and hope that the DC police are eventually able to bring some closure to the Crawford family, once and for all. Now, just before I end the video, I wanted to quickly draw your attention to the GoFundMe page which was set up by Chyna's family to help raise reward money for anybody with information relating to the case. The goal is to reach $5,000 and they are currently almost halfway there, so if you would like to help this family find justice for their loved one, feel free to check out the GoFundMe page and donate whatever you can. I will leave a link to it in the description below. They are also asking the public to share relevant posts about Chyna's case using the hashtag #FindChyna. So if you are from the DC area, it would be a massive help if you could spread the word and help bring more awareness to the cause. Anyway, with that, I think I'll leave this video here. But if you have any theories of your own that you would like to discuss, please leave your ideas in the comment section below, and I'll do my best to get back to you. But until then, thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any case updates. Also, if you found this video interesting, make sure to check out the playlist on screen now, where I've covered a range of similar cases including the suspicious disappearance of DeAndrea Ford, who, as previously mentioned, was another young woman of colour that went missing back in September, never to be seen again.